the last couple of months, and we're very proud of that. I'm going to talk about three themes related to Hanukkah, which came out of the study that we did over the last month together. And I'm also going to bless Alon on behalf of Abby and myself. As I said, we've been studying with Alon for the last month on themes related to Hanukkah. And Alon talked about some of those themes in his Dvar Torah, and I would like to elaborate and mention several others. I think the first thing that struck us when we started to think about Hanukkah, it is a very special holiday for us, and it has particular significance in the modern state of Israel, and because we live in Modi'in. And there's such strong analogies between the Maccabim overcoming the Greek Syrians and the modern state of Israel, where the underdog, who is less well equipped, less numerous than their opponent, somehow miraculously is able to beat the opponent. And the similarity is striking. And Alon talked about the menorah, which is a symbol of the Maccabees, and that period being the symbol of the state of Israel. And there are many other similarities too. We took some of the family on a tour of the Rabin Museum in Tel Aviv on last Monday, and when you read the first couple of chapters of the first book of Maccabees, which is really the history of persecution of Jews who were living at that time, and quite unpleasant persecution, where they would, for example, say to priests, either you will become the leader we want you to be, or we'll kill you. Or in the case of a very famous story where there were some Jews who refused to fight on Shabbat, and they were slaughtered by the Greek Syrians. And that led to the belief amongst the Maccabim that they would fight on Shabbat, because the cause for which they were fighting justified it. So that's the context, and we saw a tremendous similarity between the fighting that took place, and some would argue, and it's true, that still takes place today, and the fighting that took place at the time of the Maccabees when they were trying to fight off the Greek Syrians. So there's three themes that I'd like to mention. The first, which is kind of an obvious one, and which we don't often associate with Hanukkah. We probably associate it more with Pesach, but the plight of the Jews living in Eretz Yisrael at the time was really very brutal. They were persecuted. And some of the things that I looked at saw this as probably one of the first cases of very specific religious persecution, where they were not allowed to practice their religion. And remember, the Greeks on the whole, as a civilization, allowed the countries that they conquered to continue to practice their own religions. But the branch of the Greeks that, the generals after Alexander died, the generals that took control of Syria, that at this time they didn't allow the practice of Judaism. And there's a story of how the soldiers from the Greek army come to the village where the Yehuda Matityahu and his family are living, and they say to him, "You'll say what we want, and then you'll be the leader of the people, right? But you'll do what we want you to do. Otherwise, we'll kill you." And he killed those people making those threats, and from there the battle against the Greeks continued. But the point I wanted to make, there was a period of several years more from when the temple was not completely destroyed, but definitely profane. They weren't allowed to practice. Greek gods were put in there, where they were persecuted. And the experience of persecution should always remind us of the plight of others who are persecuted. And we should think about that and remember that as well. The two other themes that I want to talk about, Alon touched on these when he talked about on the one hand the Haftorah, which is not by force and power but by the Spirit of God, which is a very, very famous pasuk and verse. And I just want to talk about that a little bit. And in a historical context, think of it, the Maccabees triumphed unexpectedly against a much more powerful army. And so we can understand that because we live in the modern state of Israel, and we've seen that and experienced that before at the establishment. And so there would have been tremendous reason to celebrate when they came and retook Jerusalem and took back the temple and started to practice their religion freely again. And so you would imagine that there's a celebration of might and power. But we were asking the question while we were studying, well, how can it be that the Maccabees and those that fought for the modern state of Israel, how did they triumph over such much more powerful enemies? And we also saw in that the side of the pasuk which says by the Spirit of God. What does the Spirit of God mean? Alon talked about it a little bit. And in some ways we understand it because you can want to fight someone who's persecuting you. You can have a good reason to do it. You have to have a belief and faith that what you're fighting for is just and right. And that is also part of the spirit of man, maybe not the Spirit of God. But so without those two things together, without the force and the power, and also, on the other hand, the belief and the faith, which is part of your spirit, you won't be successful. And so it's kind of like a yin and yang, to use an Eastern religious metaphor. Both work well when you have them together. And alone, maybe they don't work so well. Now, when we start to think about what does it mean, we know that the prophets, one of their core messages was, it's not enough just to practice. It's not enough just to follow religious observance or to follow halachot towards other human beings. One has to have the right intention, the right kavanah. So this is also a matter of spirit in some ways. That just doing what you're supposed to do isn't enough. And this was the message of the prophet. So why did the Spirit of God disappear after the prophets? I don't know. We're suggesting maybe it's because humans and Jews also maybe lost a little bit of the spirit and intention of action, not just the action itself. And that right action is always better when it's accompanied by right intention. So that's great while you're fighting a war, which the Maccabees were. But what about after the war? What about after you've won the war? Force and power aren't so important anymore. But what's left is still spirit and faith. And those things have become very important. And the message of the prophets, even more so. And we have many challenges in the state of Israel, and we're not going to try and solve those right now. But maybe we can take something from the message of Hanukkah being both by action and power and by right intention and spirit and faith and the Spirit of God. The final thing that I want to talk about is a story that comes from the second chapter of Maccabees, where Mattityahu is dying. And he calls his sons in front of him, and he's trying to motivate them to carry on his fight and his battle. He's trying to pass on his own values to his children, to his sons. So Abby and I, even though we hope and pray we're many, many years from dying, we felt there was something very symbolic in that act of thinking, how can you pass on your values to your children and to your sons? And I want to say two things about that. One on a personal level, and one on a historical level. What does he say to his sons? He says, Shimon will be your father and your leader, but Judah will be your military commander. So he doesn't leave one in charge. He splits the power. And maybe that's one of the first instances I'm aware of where the power was divided, and that's a separation of powers, which we would talk about today, and that's an issue in the modern state of Israel and many other countries. Don't let someone become too powerful because maybe they'll abuse that power, separate the power. It's also that maybe he knew that Judah was a better fighter than Shimon was. And so he did it. But now, on a personal level, imagine 5 brothers, they're dying. The father calls them in and he says, follow Judah as the military commander, follow Shimon as the leader. What are the other brothers going to say? What about me? Okay? But they listened to their father. They accepted their differences, right? They decided that they would work together and that the sum of the parts is stronger than any one individual. So we felt there was a very nice message in that. So their father was saying to them, work together, and he was also giving them the message of spirit and faith and beliefs. In closing, Abby and I would like to bless you, Alon. Our blessing to you is always strive to match right action with right intention. Be proud of who you are, of your family, of your religion, of your country. Remember the message of the prophets that right action without right intention is shallow and lacks the Spirit of God. Right action and intention together, combined with family unity, are powerful forces that just like the Maccabees, can enable you to achieve great things.